Welcome to episode 28 of The Bio. It's the Moj, Bob Marjanovic with you, and our next guest had, well, an amazing career in the Canadian Football League. He is a two-time Grey Cup champion. He is a member of the Canadian Football Hall of Fame, member of the BC Sports Hall of Fame. The accolades go on, but even better, he's a great guy. Brent Johnson is our subject today on The Bio. Brent, thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me. This is great. I'm participant number 28, so I assume you've got this all figured out now.
Yeah, 28, and I imagine you might be a little disappointed if you heard that Suter, I think, was 27, so.
Now I'm just offended. I'm going to have to do a really good podcast then.
Yeah. Nice talking to you, Brent. We'll talk to you later. Have a good night.
How are things going?
Things are going well. I mean, you're looking great. I mean, you look like you could, I don't want to say you look like you can still play because you actually look fit. You look more like you're ready for the Tour de France, for crying out loud.
I wish. There was a time where I was fitter, but you know what? I feel good, coming out of 2 years of hibernation, the kind of thing. I found, COVID was tough and it was hard. I had more time on my hands, but I think I did less with it during COVID. So,
Well, I'm glad we're all getting out of it and trying to get back to the new normal, I guess.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your beginnings. Kingston, Ontario. What was childhood like growing up in Kingston?
It was, I've told this story a few times, but, it was very typical in regards to if you thought of, being a kid growing up in the 80s, kind of a lot of hockey. There wasn't a lot to choose from in regards to sports. You had hockey in the winter and you had baseball in the summer, a little bit of soccer here and there, but that was pretty much it. And my town was just built on hockey, Kingston. So that was the thing you sort of did. Grew up, 4 sisters. My dad and mom close to aunts and uncles, so there was always family around and things like that. So it was a general sort of your kind of sort of young Canadian small town upbringing, I guess, for me. But yeah, I don't get back as much as I'd like to, obviously, to Kingston because I'm out here full time now. But it was lovely, great place to grow up. I highly recommend it to anybody who wants to go back east and start a life there.
Hockey was like the sport for you growing up, from what I understand. In fact, I heard a rumor you're an Edmonton Oilers fan.
Well, it pretty much had to be at that time. I mean, I had no allegiance to Toronto, and I think my sisters were Habs fans, and Wayne Gretzky, Paul Coffey, Mark Messier, Grant Fuhrer, Andy Moog, the Islanders, Mike Bossy, John Brian Trottier, yeah. That whole sort of Stanley Cup playoffs, that was my introduction to hockey and sport at that level of competition. So, we kind of just drew sides at school. One group was the Islanders and one team was the Oilers. And I just stuck with the Oilers because, it was Wayne Gretzky and the rest of the crew. It was an easy choice.
Now, you never played football growing up until grade 9, I believe. So how did that transition occur from hockey and being this Oiler fan to becoming a football player?
It probably more out of necessity I needed a new sport. I was just burnt out with football. I'd been doing it since I was burnt out from hockey. I'd been doing it since I was about 4 years old. And I believe it was one of my older sisters, like one of their boyfriends. I had none intention of trying out for the football team or doing any of that. I was just going to sort of carry on with my hockey. But I was getting sort of the point in hockey where I needed to make a decision of how serious or how far I wanted to take that. And to be honest with you, I didn't really know what opportunities were there. But I was around 14 and one of my sister's boyfriends were like, you should really consider trying out for football. And I knew nothing about football in the sense of like rules and the game and what you had to do. I figured out, what a touchdown was and, quarterbacks throw the ball, that sort of thing. But I didn't watch a lot of it. I wasn't really, it wasn't part of our family culture much. I mean, we watched the CFL, we watched the NFL, but it was it was so far off to the sidelines. And so I didn't really even consider it. And then the first day of school came around, and I think I said to a buddy of mine, I'm like, I think I'm going to go try out for the football team. That looks like it's going to be all right. And went out, and it was like every kid from Kingston was there trying out for this team. Like it felt like hundreds of kids just lined up to try out, and they had their return. So when I grew up, it was just, you had 2 years in junior and then 3 years in as senior football players, right? In high school, because in Ontario at that time, we had this sort of grade 13 thing going on. And we don't have that anymore. But anyway, your first 2 years, you go to this junior football team. So all the grade 10s were coming back from last year. And I was in grade 9, and we had all these grade 9s. And somehow, some way, thank God they didn't ask us to actually know what to do. It was more like they just ran us around, made us jump over bags. And so it wasn't really any like needed football skills, just more athleticism, I guess. And I kind of just did it all and hung on somehow, and they took me on. And I didn't really start coming into my own though until grade 11, around there.
Yeah, I was reading about that. It's not exactly like you were a natural. From what I've read, is that you played one down in grade 9. One.
Yeah, I think I played one down. Well, I know I played one down. It was against our so not our rival, but another high school named Frontenac. And then I ended up breaking my arm or something like that. And then I basically just came out to practice like a ball boy for the rest of the year. And like, because my math teacher was the head coach, Dan Jessen, and he was like, well, you still got to come out. And I'm like, what? No, I want to go home. I don't want to hang out in the rain in the middle of Ontario in October. And he was just like, no, you got to keep coming out. So out I went, and I sort of ball boyed the whole thing for that season. And the next season came around, and I kind of finally grew a little bit. And I had my, when you sort of get a little bit of, you get your feet under you in regards to, you're not clumsy, you're not as clumsy, you're not growing as much, that sort of thing, or gangly. And my body was catching up to me. So I actually went in and went into the weight room, that sort of going into grade 10 year, but really got into it going into my grade 11 year. And that's when it sort of took off. And I was like, oh, I could do this. I'm having a lot of success with this, and I could probably take it to the next level, meaning I could take it to university if I wanted to. But it was humble. When I say it was bad at the start, it was bad. I had no idea what any position did. I had no idea how to technique or anything. So, and I was raw, but I was lucky. I was around good coaches, and they made it fun and enjoyable, and it sparked my interest. I just wanted to get better at it.
You did, and you eventually wind up getting a lot of interest. And for someone who was around the CIS at that time, and coaching football at UBC in the early 90s, late 80s, it was rare to see a kid get a scholarship to a Power 5 school.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what you did at that time. Probably a little bit more, it's not as rare now, but back then it was kind of rare because Power 5 schools, big schools, didn't really recruit in Canada. It wasn't like the day of the internet where, they can go online and see video of you playing or whatever. They had all those camps as well. They have all these camps now and all that. Take us through the process of how you wound up at Ohio State University.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I actually think if it was to happen all over again now, I'm not sure they would take me. No, but it sort of just all fell into place. But they did have camps back in the day, but they were so poorly advertised that you didn't really know where to, like Michigan would have a camp, Michigan State would have a camp, Ohio State would have a camp, but maybe one of the coaches at your high school would get a sniff of when that was and get some brochures mailed to them or something. But even then, that was a hit or miss. It was much more like the Canadian school. So I had Queen's University in Kingston, obviously, which, I went to their camp and things like that. But it was really, at that time, a lot of it was done. There was a scout there's a scouting service called, I forget what it was called. It was
Was
like,
it All-Star? I think it was Ron Diaz that ran it. A guy named Ron Diaz.
Ron. I was good. Yeah,
Yeah.
Ron ran it, but I think it was All-Star. Yeah,
Yeah.
recruiting. And basically, what they would do is they would put this list together. They would go and do all the homework for the coaches and basically say, okay, Canada's a big country. Let's go Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary. Let's get to these big areas and invite everyone to come to us. We'll do the combine. We'll do like the 40s and vert jumps and bench press and one-on-ones and do all that stuff. Tape it all and get all the data for them, and then basically sell them the list. And that was the idea behind it. I went to one of those. I want to say in what the spring of like '94. I want to say. And it was really just, it was this gym in like Brampton or something outside Toronto. And it was all these American coaches that came to one central location just to see what was on sort of offer. It was like, yeah, it was just like a, I don't know, like it was like the horse trade. Like they were just like, here's everybody you can check out today. And I did really well. My numbers were really good at that. And then after that, it was really just, and I always say this, like, if Ohio State likes you, Michigan's going to like you, and Penn State's going to like you, and on and on and on down the road. But you're right. It's different now. We have a really like clear view of what a Power 5 school is. Now, at that time, it was still pretty, I mean, there was always the teams that have always been there, right? There's always the Alabamas and Ohio States, and Floridas and Florida States at that time, and Penn State and Michigan and all the USC. They were always the bigger schools, but I never really thought about them when I was going through it, like, oh, like my goal is to go to this sort of Power 5 school, or to go to, I just knew I was getting attention from them, and that, okay, well, that's good. And they want me to come down for a recruiting trip. And by doing that, okay, they must be interested. And so that was really how it happened. There wasn't even, believe it or not, there wasn't even that much exchange of film. And to be honest with you, there was nothing to really show on film anyway. It was like, I was basically like, here, I'm pretty raw, but I can do this, this, and this. So if that works for you and you can take me and make me better, then okay.
Your recruiting trip, good story here. The guy who was like one of your hosts, from what you told me before, now the head coach of the Tennessee Titans, great Patriots, Mike Vrabel.
Yeah.
And I see Mike, I've seen him at the Super Bowl a couple of times, says, hey, Brent Johnson's ripping it up in Canada. He goes, oh, Brent, that's awesome. He still remembers. So.
Oh, yeah. No, like, well, I haven't seen Mike in eons, but no, I mean, he was a senior when I was a freshman coming in, right? And it was kind of like, okay, well, you're paired up with these guys, him, Matt Finkus, Luke Fickle, who's the head coach in Cincinnati now. They were all my seniors coming in on the D line. So it was like, I mean, we were all like brothers. Like that was everyone I saw every day.
You know, it's interesting. I remember what Chase Claypool said when he went to the pros. He said for him, it was a harder transition going from high school to Notre Dame than it was from Notre Dame to the NFL.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fair.
Is that fair? Is that fair with you as well, coming from a small program going to Ohio State?
No question. I mean, just the level of, I mean, everybody talks about the speed, and that's evident, but the level of just football knowledge, the people who you are practicing and playing with day in and day out just have such a vast knowledge of the game and how it's supposed to work and where you should be and where you shouldn't be. And just all those intangibles that you can't coach. It's not X's and O's. It's just repetition and time. And they just know it because they've been doing it since they were 4 years old. So that part was a huge learning curve for me. The good part about that is that I was at least afforded, or at least I afforded myself enough time to to sit there, like, to me, going there and getting the scholarship, I had already thought, like, I was like, this is great. Like, this is fantastic. I'm going to get a university degree. It's going to be great. But I was still competitive, and I wanted to sort of put my, make my mark there. But I didn't realize how further away I was than it, because I mean, in my short-lived time with Jacksonville in the NFL, or anyone that goes pro, it's not such a huge step up. In physicality, it is a bit more, just because you become, well, you're a man more. You're playing with grown men. There's a bit more of a physicality and violence to it, but not as much as you'd think. But there's a cold business side to professional sports, and that's the big jump when you go from I think the jump, there is no waiting around. There's no developing, right? No. I mean, there's certain positions that'll get developed, but for the most part, you're not really going to be developed when you hit the pros. You're going to be coached to win games against certain, you're going to be coached certain strategies every week and you're adaptable to those strategies, so you can go out and play them. But no, the jump to college, university ball was very evident that my football knowledge was lacking tremendously.
More with Brent Johnson after these quick messages. Brent, the Ohio State experience, you played in a Rose Bowl, you played in a couple of Sugar Bowls, went up against some guy named Brady, sacked him. The game against Michigan, probably one of the biggest rivalries, if not the biggest rivalry in college football. How would you describe your Ohio State experience?
Absolutely fantastic in regards to everything that I envisioned. College football, university student athlete experience was it. The games couldn't have been bigger. The rewards couldn't have been bigger. The chances for to keep your career going couldn't be more, I guess, attainable in regards to you've got the whole stage of the nation every Saturday. So that sort of stuff was fantastic. It changes you as a player and a bit of a person, just because the competition is so fierce, right? It's just we have people at Ohio State that leave full scholarships at other places for a walk-on opportunity, right? And they are very good football players. So it's just this level of intensity and competition that you're constantly under. And to be honest, it's fantastic, but you can only do so much of it. When you're 4 years or 5 years are up, you're like, okay, that was fantastic. But like, you need an opportunity to breathe coming out of a program like that, because you're just so under the microscope, and everyone is being motivated in different ways when they're there. But that being said, as the group of guys that I got to play with and be around, it couldn't have asked for a better experience and a better family to do that with. I absolutely loved it.
Pro football, you talked about it being a business. Your first exposure to pro football was going to Jacksonville's camp. What do you remember about that experience?
Tom Coughlin was the coach at the time. I was kind of a tweener coming out of university. I had good success in university, but I wasn't going to be a first or second round draft pick. That just wasn't in the cards. So there was talk like, okay, later rounds or something like that. But I think, there's a level of, when you're coming out of university, there's a level of sort of business savvy that I think players coming out now are much more prepared to have, and not even savvy, more preparedness. They're prepared for that, okay, now we're going to switch to, I'm going to get my paychecks from football now, and I'm going to make this my livelihood, and I'm going to be a professional. I had no idea what that really was about. I mean, I wasn't groomed as, in my family to go do this really, it wasn't like everyone's intention. It just, things kept falling in line for me, and I excelled through it. But I didn't really have I didn't have the ability to know what the next move should be, or how to promote yourself, or what even, and you think this isn't a big deal, but it's even, what agents you go with, and how you're perceived by, other coaches or other players that are already there. You don't know, but there is this sort of ongoing eye test, and they want to know, what you've been doing, your background, and they want you to sort of sell yourself a bit, especially, if you're not that 1% or 2% kind of guy that just, they're going to go in and be amazing anyway. But sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, but I don't think I was prepared for that. That sort of the marketing of yourself to make sure that you're doing everything you can to make that team, right?
One thing you mentioned a couple times already is burnout. You talked about it with hockey. It sounded like there might have been a little burnout with Ohio State. What kept you going to the Canadian Football League and eventually becoming a BC Lion?
I think it was just, I remember talking to Adam Rita at that time. That was the GM. And he's like, well, come on out. We'll fly you out. We'll move you out. And I had been down in the States for 6 years at that time. I left right out of high school. And I think, and it was like this whirlwind. And I think I just needed a place where I was like, okay, well, Vancouver sounds nice. I've never been there. And, I was into sort of, okay, they got nice mountains and it seems like it's a great town and that. And I kind of was like, okay, I'll give that a try. And, Adam's big thing was like, when our season's done, take your time off then. We're done. There isn't, off-season workouts, even at that, like this was 2001. They didn't really have many structured off-season workouts and things like that. So you'd have this big gap of time between seasons. And I sort of looked at that like, okay. And I came up very strangely, 2001, September 11th, 2001, I flew out of the States, got stuck in Minneapolis for a week because of the towers came down, and then finally made my way out here. And I remember thinking like, okay, like this is halfway through the season, or a bit more than halfway through the season. I'm going to play out this season. Maybe we'll go to the playoffs or something like that. And then in the off season, I need to make a decision. Like, do I really want to keep doing this? And if not, I'll figure something else out along the way. And
Well,
yeah, sorry.
I'm just going to say, the career itself, you start off in 2001, you wrap it up with a greycup in 2011. And it's interesting because people looked at you as the prototypical defensive end for the Canadian game and the uniqueness of being Canadian. But yet when you arrived, there were issues in terms of where they were going to play you.
Yeah, they want to make me like a nose tackle, or, I remember being so like just pissed off about that in regards to like here I'm pretty good at playing defensive end. I'll try the nose tackle thing out for you if you want.
Whose idea was that? Was that Adam Rita's idea?
I don't know. It was, yeah, probably, but not to put the blame too much on him, to be honest with you. There was a time where it was like you had Canadian positions and you had American positions, and they still sort of have that. But it was really hard. Like if I was going to play defensive end, which I eventually ended up doing, well, that meant Wally had to go find Canadian defensive ends to back me up. Well, at that time, we had two really good defensive tackles, Canadian, Noah Cantor and Cam Legault. So it just was kind of like, well, you have to fit in there because that's where our Canadian talent is. And I'm like, well, I've never really played there, yada, yada, yada. And I really wanted to play out on the edge. Anyway, I kind of didn't take no for an answer. And then when there was the coaching change, I remember saying to Wally, like, no, I want to play defensive end. And he's like, well, you can play wherever you want. But you know, like, as long as you're good, you play wherever you want. And that's sort of that was my sort of transition into, you know, playing more and being part of those teams that we had through, you know, the 2000s and that. But yeah, he gave me the flexibility. He didn't care. He was like, yeah, play wherever you want and we'll find people.
184 straight games. So you talk about playing, and, you know, if there's any concerns, I don't know if that Canadian backup defensive end would have made a difference playing 184 straight. But the crazy thing about that is that streak, and I remember the night, it was a home game at BC Place, and we're like, where's Brent Johnson? Brent's not playing tonight. His wife is in labor. He's not playing. So this undersized linebacker plays rush in that night. And it was basically it was the coming out party for Adam Bighill that night, who wound up playing your position.
Yeah, very well, by the way.
What was that?
Very well, by the way, that night.
Yeah.
I remember the next day I came in, I was like all tired because I'd been up. What do I could be tired about? But my wife was in labor forever, and coming into meetings the next day, the baby had been born that night at, you know, like at 12 o'clock, and Biggie coming by, just going, man, like that. I played defensive end last night, and that was crazy. Like, that's crazy. And I'm like, what? Because I was in the middle of, like, it wasn't the delivery room, but we were in the thick of it, right? So I wasn't even watching the game. I was just getting like texts on my phone here and there of what was going on. And then, Wally did call and ask to see if I could come down at halftime. My wife always reminds him of that.
Hey, but you know, Biggie had a good game. I think he had a couple of sacks that night. He almost Wally pipped you, for crying out loud.
No, totally, he did. I was like, I got to get back to work here because Biggie's going to take my job for sure, which he probably would have. But like, here he is, goes out there, has a hell of a game. And you're right. Like, I remember Adam coming into that camp that year, and I remember watching him. We were up in Kamloops, and I remember watching him. Solomon had already sort of had the middle linebacker spot for that year, but there was this kid, Adam Bighill, that would just not stop at practice, right? And I remember one of the coaches saying, yeah, I mean, because we were on the sidelines, it was before some preseason games, so we were just doing walkthroughs, and he's still going 100 miles an hour. And I remember one coach saying, yeah, it's too bad we're not going to be able to keep him, because, you know, after this game, like, because he's such a great effort guy, and, you know, which is really misleading for Adam, because Adam had fantastic skills too, but they were just like, they'd already made up their minds. And I remember a bunch of us on the bench just being like, are you out of your mind? That's like the one guy. Cut him, you know, but not him. Like, he's the one guy that's flying around, and he'll go a million miles an hour. And I know that in pros, you know, there's a cliche to that, like, hey, you know, like, bring it down a notch because it's a long season and we don't want to get injured in that. But he played so well going hard and showed so much intensity and want to be there. Like, I think everyone was just shocked when the coach said that. And eventually people said, like, we got to keep this guy. Yeah. And he ended up obviously sticking around and having the amazing career he's had. But yeah, that was his coming out party when Roman was born, my son.
I remember that night. Yeah. More with Brent Johnson after these quick messages. Brent, you had an outstanding career, and we'll get into the individual accolades, and there's many of them, but 2 Grey Cup championships, one in 2006, one in 2011, and awesome finishing your career by winning the Grey Cup in BC. I don't know how you top that, but I remember also reading about the fact that you felt like there could have been more, right? Do you feel like you kind of left some on the table, or now that you've kind of had a little bit of separation from your playing career, it probably doesn't I don't know, bug you as much maybe that it did maybe 5 or 10 years ago?
I left probably some years of playing football. Maybe I left that on the table, but that was intentional. You know, it was intentional to leave. When I left, it was intentional at that time. It was my decision. It wasn't Wally's or the team's. It was mine, and I wanted it that way. And I was ready to move on. I was never going to, not that you had to top, but I was never going to get an ending like we had in 2011. I would never get the roller coaster ride what was that season. And then march that into playoffs, into a Grey Cup in Vancouver for the team I've only played for, to go win it that year and to go out a champion under the lights where you called home for the last 11 years. So yeah, could I have played some more years? Yes. And I probably, but then again, yeah, then you got to look at what are you risking to do that? I never had injuries. My knees feel good. My back feels good. I feel good. I didn't want to push that any further. You know,
I was thinking not necessarily from an individual perspective, but more from a team perspective.
Oh,
you get the 2 Grey Cups, yet at the same time, I mean, that team, like in the mid 2000, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 era, you could have won maybe 2 or 3 in that era.
Well, we left a ton. So I think we left a ton on the table running up to 2006 and right after 2006. So 2004 and 5, honestly, I think they were better teams than 2006. And 2007 was a fantastic team too. But 2005, we were like assassins. The only games I think we lost is because we were just lost interest in it, of winning. I don't know what it was, those games, but we were so good with Dave at the helm. And, once the whole KC Printers, if you can remember back the KC Printers, Dave Dickinson, who's going to play fiasco, once that all got sorted out, it was so much fun playing football during those days. And just because of the amount of talent that we had, you look on the other side of the ball, you've got Dave Dickinson, you've got, our whole offensive line at that time, Rob Murphy, Angus, Kelly Bates, you've got, who's in the middle? We got Javi Glatt was our middle linebacker, Dante Marsh, Corey Banks, all these guys, Baron Miles, safety, it was just incredible. And then look at the D-line too that we had through those years too. But we had Chris Wilson, Aaron Hunt, Tyrone Williams, studs, and it was ours for the taking, and we really screwed it up. We screwed up the Grey Cup in 2004 in Ottawa, and then we had it in 2005 at our house, and Edmonton beat us out in the finals, in the Western Final, which was just tragic. And we were going to play, I believe, Montreal in the Grey Cup, and and we had to wait till 2006 to sort of get it all together. And then after that, you get that sort of, when Cam Wake came in 2007, 2008 kind of era, and we still had so much immense talent around at that point too, but we just couldn't make it work.
I've got some numbers here, and they're individual accolades. So I'm going to ask you at the end, which one, is your favorite? You've got the jerseys retired, 97's retired by the Lions. You're in the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. 3-time CFL All-Star, all Big Ten team in 2000. 2-time CFL Most Outstanding Canadian, CFL Most Outstanding Defensive Player Award in 2006, which is unheard of for a Canadian defensive lineman. 88 sacks, all right, 4 picks, and 2 touchdown catches.
The touchdowns.
It's funny you mentioned Tyrone Williams because I remember Big Ty would go in on short yardage, and he would count. And then I guess you kind of took over for Tyrone.
Yeah, he got one or two, I think. Yeah, he got one or two that way. Yeah. No, it's yeah. I you know, that year was really defining. 2006 was really defining in regards to the Defensive Player of the Year award. That I remember. I think it was me and Baron Simpson that were up for it, and Baron had been the middle linebacker at BC when I first arrived. So it was very. It was a really kind of a weird moment, but also a moment where that whole time or that team there felt like it was like me and a handful of other guys really had a hand in building it. And then those accolades that came that year, by the way, with the greycup, the most important one, really solidified that we put together this group of guys that really wanted to go out and win and to play for this team. And I never felt that as much through all the years other than that year. You know, it really came together. We had more talent other years. We should have won other years, but that year specifically, I think that sort of roundup, because if you remember, Rob got lineman of the year, I think that year. I think someone else picked up, G-Roy, of course, picked up an MVP that year. And then Mark Washington picked up something, I think, that year too. So it was just like, it was like this team that we all got together and we knew the mistakes of the past where we should have won those cups. And it was finally like here. And, you know, I remember that whole week leading up to that game in Winnipeg in 2006, that was just encapsulated that us as players, this tight group of players, we made all the right decisions in regard who we wanted to win with. And everyone in that locker room wanted to win. And it was great. And we got to do it with guys like Carl Kidd too, who had put his time in many years, you know, before that. It was just a great group of people that we got to win with.
You retire on your own terms. You walk away. A lot of times when athletes walk away from the sport they love, it's a difficult transition because many of them define themselves as a football player, a hockey player, or whatever, you know, sport they've played. Yeah, you've made it seems to be a seamless transition into the world of finance, or has there been struggles there?
Oh, absolutely. There were struggles. No, and well, yeah, there's struggles every day, man. Yeah, no, but the struggle is real. It's a shift in mindset. And I was actually thinking about this today, knowing that we were going to do this tonight. And, you know, as the years go by, you don't, obviously you don't have forums like this or a place like this, like you did when you were playing. You know, you were interviewed every day and people ask you different questions every day. But this is, you know, a time where I've transitioned to this other thing in my life, which is, you know, everyday sort of work. And don't get me wrong, football's everyday sort of work too. But the transition is not smooth. And I don't think it's smooth for any athlete, just because I was thinking about this, you know, the way that you measure yourself as an athlete, and I think this is why, I can't be sure, why a lot of athletes have trouble with this transition, and I know I did, is that, you know, the feedback loop of the signs that you're doing well, or you're progressing, or you're in the right place, is much bigger in the working world or the corporate world or the regular sort of outside the athletics world. Football's a very fast, and sports is a very fast feedback loop. You're either doing it right or you're doing it wrong, and you're being corrected on it. And you take a lot of pride in how quickly you can correct your mistakes. And you take a lot of pride on how coachable you are. Players that aren't coachable just don't last very long, right? It's hard for them. But you're either winning games or you're doing well at practice. We have cameras all over us. Every step's being analyzed. You're either going forward or you're going backwards. But in the transition into the real world, that feedback loop is really large, and you don't know how to accept the idea that you could be moving in the right direction, or you're not, or you're getting praise but you don't really understand why, or you're not doing a great job, right? That loop is just so much bigger, and it's so direct in sports. So that transition, I think, was probably one of the hardest things I had to deal with, in that there wasn't this overarching sort of we're watching every step you're doing and making sure that you're doing it right. And by the way, when we go play, there's going to be points up on the board. And if you get more points, you get to be happy. And if you don't score enough points, well, then you should be sad. And that's basically in the gist of how, sports kind of works, right? Like you failed or you succeeded, right? And it's right there for everyone to see. Well, it just doesn't work like that in the real world. Yes, you fail and succeed, but it takes a long time sometimes to figure out, how bad a job you're doing, or that you're not going in the right direction, or that you need some coaching, or you need some help, and you need those things. Because truly, I needed all of it, because I became an expert in one field and decided to go, okay, I'm no longer I don't want to work in that field anymore. I'm going to try to become an expert in something else, and go right back to baby steps. And that, is, that sort of pride swallowing kind of, hey, I've got to reprogram myself here and get with this program now. And yeah, it was tough, but it was also, and it still is, it's extremely satisfying too, that I can go out and change direction, and anyone can, and go do something new. It's just, you got to give yourself time. And I gave myself enough time,
Well, and the good part about it, as a financial advisor, and we'll get a quick plug in at the end, but as a financial advisor, if you have a bad day, nobody knocks you on your ass, and you don't have a room full of people watching on tape knowing that you got blown up on a certain play. You wouldn't know that experience. I would. You wouldn't. Before we let you go, Brent, a quick plug for how people can follow you in terms of, what you're doing with finance, if they need any help.
Well, I'm not on any of the socials or anything like that, but yeah, I work for CIBC Wealth Management, Private Wealth, CIBC Wood Gundy. So I've been in investment advisor, portfolio management. I work with a team of 7. Type me up, and I'm in there. And we help everything from families, individuals, foundations. We work with them, help them with their investment decisions, and get them through sort of the sports analogy would be get them into the end zone. So, and it's been a fun ride, and I still got a lot to learn, but I'm enjoying it.
Well, Brent, this has been awesome catching up with you and hearing your story and your beginnings from Kingston. Thanks so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.